The Agnelli family controls Ferrari, Jeep, Chrysler, Maserati, and The Economist. They own Juventus, a football club valued at over $2 billion, and hold significant influence over Italy's largest bank. Through their holding company Exor, they control approximately 30% of Italy's stock market and employ over 360,000 people worldwide. At their peak, the companies under Giovanni Agnelli's direction accounted for nearly 8% of Italy's entire GDP. Government policies regularly moved in alignment with Fiat's business interests. Yet despite this scale of power, the Agnelli name remains largely unknown outside Italy. They are not simply Italy's wealthiest family. They are the family whose decisions have historically determined whether Italy's economy expanded or contracted. Their method for accumulating this power was consistent. Back whoever was winning: fascists, allied forces, communists. The Agnellis adapted to every political tide and survived them all. In Italy, power rarely changes hands through elections or markets. It passes through bloodlines, from palaces to boardrooms, largely unchanged across generations. Other dynasties have shaped parts of Italian life: the Benettons in infrastructure, the Pirellis in industry, the Berlusconis in media. But none of them match the Agnellis. They are Italy's industrial royalty, having built or absorbed the country's most recognized companies, shaped its culture, and converted industrial scale into political authority. When discussing the Agnellis, everything begins with Fiat. That car company became the engine of Italy's industrial identity, and through it, the family pressed their fingerprints into every corner of Italian life. The story begins in 1899, when Italy was still consolidating as a modern nation. The North was industrializing quickly, but much of the country remained rural and poor. Giovanni Agnelli arrived in this environment with a military background and a talent for recognizing opportunity in disorder. Agnelli saw the beginning of an industry. Together with a small group of investors, he founded Fabbrica Italiana Automobili Torino, shortened to Fiat. The first factory opened in 1900. Agnelli took command as managing director and oversaw 35 workers who built 24 cars that year. By 1904, their production had grown fivefold. By 1906, Fiat was producing thousands of cars annually and had already opened a dealership in New York City before most Italians owned any car at all. That same year, Fiat became a corporation. Giovanni had started as a junior partner and gradually assumed full control. He acquired critical patents and introduced early assembly line systems and precision engine tooling that put Fiat ahead of competitors. He created an industry from conditions that contained no obvious invitation for one. In 1908, Fiat faced its first serious reckoning. A financial scandal shook the company. Rumors spread about falsified accounts and manipulated share prices. The entire board was forced to resign. Giovanni Agnelli was taken to court and accused of stock price manipulation. The prosecutors failed to prove the case, and he walked free, but the damage to the family's reputation was real and lasting. The episode changed him. He became more strategic, less trusting, and considerably more calculated in his alliances. When World War I broke out, Agnelli moved quickly to convert the crisis into opportunity. He secured military contracts and shifted Fiat's Turin factories to round-the-clock wartime production, supplying the Italian military with trucks, tanks, aircraft, tractors, and diesel engines. By the time the war reached full intensity, Fiat employed over 30,000 workers. The profits were extraordinary, and so were the accusations. Critics targeted Fiat for war profiteering. Agnelli recognized the political exposure and turned to one of the most dangerous figures of his era, Benito Mussolini, then a rising Italian nationalist. In 1914, Agnelli funded Mussolini's political movement. When Fiat came under fire for wartime profits, Mussolini repaid the arrangement by clearing the company's record. The alliance delivered results well beyond what Agnelli had anticipated. By the late 1930s, Fiat employed over 50,000 workers and dominated Italy's industrial landscape. When World War II erupted, Fiat's assembly lines shifted again, this time producing tanks, trucks, and aircraft engines for Mussolini's forces. When Italy aligned with Nazi Germany, Fiat maintained that supply chain as well. As the war turned against Italy, Giovanni shifted his position. He began expressing sympathy for the Allied cause, reading the direction of history, and attempting to protect the family name from post-war consequences. In 1945, Italian authorities temporarily seized Agnelli assets for fascist collaboration. The punishment was brief. Fiat was too central to Italy's economic survival to dismantle, and the family's connections helped them evade full accountability. That survival made room for the next generation. Giovanni's grandson, Gianni Agnelli, took charge in 1945. Gianni was sharp, ambitious, and understood that power required both earning and maintaining. By 1963, he was managing director. 3 years later, he was chairman and CEO, effectively the most powerful industrialist in Western Europe. He dragged Italy from wartime ruins into modern industrial competition and was not afraid to cross ideological lines in doing so. In the middle of the Cold War, he struck a deal with the Soviet Union. Together they built a factory capable of producing more than 500,000 cars per year. The agreement demonstrated that profit could override political doctrine. That logic took Fiat global. The company's production facilities spread from Moscow to Sao Paulo. Under Gianni, Fiat absorbed Italy's most prestigious automotive names: Ferrari, Alfa Romeo, Lancia, and Maserati. The company won 7 European Car of the Year awards and eventually employed over 200,000 people. 1 in every 5 Italians working in manufacturing had some connection to Fiat or its supplier network. Entire towns in Turin, Mirafiori, and Pomigliano revolved around Fiat's production lines. Employment at Fiat meant stability, status, and a share of Italy's post-war recovery. Gianni then turned his attention to France. He targeted Citroën, Europe's second-largest automaker, working through the Michelin family, who owned both Citroën and France's largest tire empire. The negotiations moved quickly, and the Michelin family appeared ready to sign. Then Charles de Gaulle intervened. The French president blocked the deal personally, citing concern about Italian control over a French national institution. Fiat was forced to accept a 15% stake and nothing more. The Citroën failure taught Gianni a clear lesson. Economic scale had limits. A single political decision could negate years of commercial positioning. Factories, employees, and industrial reach meant nothing when governments chose to act. Narratives, the stories people believed, and the coverage they consumed mattered as much as machines or capital. From that point, the Agnellis began shifting influence from factory floors to front pages. Gianni had long owned La Stampa, the Turin newspaper. His grandson, John Elkann, extended that logic on a far larger scale. Exor acquired a 43.7% stake in GEDI, Italy's largest media group, for over €102 million. The shares came from CIR, the holding company of the De Benedetti family, whose newspapers had shaped center-left public debate in Rome for decades. The Agnellis were absorbing the country's narrative infrastructure from one power circle into their own. The resulting portfolio included La Repubblica, La Stampa, 13 regional newspapers, and Radio DJ. This gave the family reach into local narratives well beyond national headlines. In 2015, Exor acquired a 43.4% stake in the Economist group, gaining influence over one of the world's most closely read international publications. The Economist's reporting feeds directly into investment decisions, government policy assessments, and boardroom discussions across Europe and beyond. With that acquisition, the Agnellis found a mechanism to project their voice and their preferred framing of events well outside Italian borders. Much like Murdoch's media empire in the UK or the Rothschild influence over the financial press, the Agnellis had mastered power through information, but headlines were never the final destination. In 1983, Alberto Agnelli helped found the European Roundtable of Industrialists, an elite lobby connecting corporate power directly to Brussels decision-makers. It was the first clear signal that the family's ambitions had moved beyond cars toward shaping the regulatory framework of European markets. In 2016, Exor relocated its legal and fiscal base to the Netherlands. The official explanation cited a simpler corporate structure and a growing international profile. In practical terms, it meant fewer legal constraints, greater control over capital movement, and the flexibility to operate as a continental entity rather than an Italian one. Exor became a European holding giant capable of deploying capital wherever opportunity presented itself. By 2024, Exor held a 10.1% stake in Claravit, a New York-listed data and analytics company that guides decisions for universities, corporations, and governments. That stake was projected to rise to 17%. In an era where data shapes investment flows, research priorities, and regulatory outcomes, the Agnellis had positioned themselves where information converts into power before it becomes publicly available. Across sectors including health, technology, energy, and heavy industry, the family holds stakes in companies that determine how Europe tracks information, funds clean energy development, and builds emerging industries. Cultural influence reinforced all of this. In 1923, Edoardo Agnelli became president of Juventus. Football connected Italy across class lines, uniting North and South, workers and elites. Each Juventus victory extended the Agnelli name into homes and neighborhoods that Fiat's factories could not reach. Successive family members, Gianni, Umberto, and Andrea, maintained that bond. In 1969, Fiat purchased 50% of Ferrari. That acquisition gave the Agnellis influence across the full range of Italian automotive identity. Fiat represented mass mobility. Ferrari represented prestige, craftsmanship, and global luxury. By 1988, Fiat had acquired 90% of Ferrari, including shares previously held by Enzo Ferrari himself. When Ferrari later went public, Exor and a separate arrangement with Piero Ferrari secured the family 48.1% of voting rights. Full ownership was no longer necessary. Structural authority was built into the arrangement. Today, John Elkann leads Exor and controls a 40 billion euro empire stretching from Milan to Amsterdam. He moves through Europe's elite business forums, think tanks, and industry foundations, spaces where CEOs, politicians, and regulators discuss policy before it becomes law. He studied the Wallenbergs and the Pritzkers, while borrowing their methods for converting generational wealth into durable institutional influence. Through those networks, the Agnellis help shape EU policy on green technology, industrial competitiveness, and mobility. The Agnellis have outlasted monarchies, dictators, and successive waves of political transformation without ever holding public office. They built their position in Turin with a car company, extended it through wartime contracts, protected it through fascist alliances, survived post-war asset seizure, and rebuilt it into a continental operation spanning media, data, sport, luxury, and industrial policy. The question their history raises is not how one family accumulated so much. It is why that accumulation has faced so little resistance across more than a century of Italian democracy.